In the heart of Afghanistan, during the height of the conflict, a group of soldiers was stationed at a remote military base. It was an old outpost, built on ancient land, rumored to have been a battlefield centuries before. The local villagers often spoke in hushed tones about the ground being cursed, but the soldiers, hardened by war, paid little attention to such stories. One cold night, after a routine patrol, the men returned to their barracks, exhausted and eager for rest. But something felt off. The temperature inside the barracks had dropped significantly, despite the harsh desert heat outside. It was as if the air itself was thick with an unseen presence, pressing down on them. Private Harris was the first to mention the strange occurrences. He claimed to hear footsteps in the middle of the night, pacing the length of the barracks when everyone else was asleep. At first, the others laughed it off, attributing it to stress or fatigue. But then the sightings began. Corporal Mitchell swore he saw a shadow standing at the end of his bed, watching him in the dark. Its eyes were glowing faintly, like embers burning from within, but when he blinked, it was gone. Every night after that, someone reported seeing the same figure, a soldier in old, tattered uniform, standing silently, as if waiting for orders. The men grew paranoid. Some refused to sleep in the barracks and opted to stay outside, despite the dangers. The haunting escalated when Sergeant Carter, a battle-hardened leader, experienced something even more terrifying. While patrolling the base late one night, he saw the figure up close, standing near the perimeter fence. As Carter approached, the figure turned, and its face was a horrifying mess of decayed flesh and empty eye sockets. The apparition pointed to the ground, and Carter instinctively looked down. There, beneath his feet, were fragments of ancient bones, buried just beneath the surface. The ground had once been a burial site for warriors long forgotten, and now their restless spirits were demanding justice. The soldiers realized they had been sleeping on cursed ground, desecrating a sacred battlefield. No matter how much they tried to move their base or clear the area, the hauntings followed them, growing stronger each night. Eventually, the outpost was abandoned, the soldiers haunted by the faces of the fallen, forever bound to the land they had once defended. The lesson: some spirits will never rest, especially when disturbed by the horrors of war. During the Vietnam War, a small American unit was sent deep into the jungle on a covert mission. Their objective was simple: locate and report on enemy activity. But the jungle had other plans for them. The deeper they ventured, the thicker the vegetation became, as if the forest itself was trying to swallow them whole. The oppressive humidity and the constant buzzing of insects were enough to drive anyone mad, but the soldiers kept pushing forward. On the second day of their mission, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned village. It was eerily silent, and the air felt thick with dread. Corporal Johnson, the youngest in the group, noticed something odd as they explored the village. Every hut had strange symbols carved into the wood, and the ground was littered with old military gear that didn't belong to any known unit. It looked as though another platoon had been there before, but there were no records of such an operation. That night, the soldiers set up camp near the village, their unease growing with every passing hour. As darkness fell, the jungle around them came alive with strange sounds, whispers, the rustling of leaves, and the faint clinking of metal. Private Miller was the first to see them. Silhouettes of soldiers, marching through the trees, their movements too mechanical, too rigid. Miller alerted the others, and they all watched in disbelief as an entire platoon of ghostly soldiers walked through the clearing, their faces emotionless, their eyes hollow. The ghostly figures marched in a loop, repeating the same path over and over again, as if trapped in an endless cycle of war. When Sergeant Daniels called out to them, the ghosts stopped abruptly, turning their heads in unison toward the living soldiers. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, without warning, the phantom platoon began to charge at them, their ghostly bayonets aimed straight at the men. The soldiers fired their weapons in panic, but the bullets passed through the apparitions, who continued their relentless advance. Desperation set in as the living soldiers scrambled to flee the area, abandoning their mission. But as they retreated, the ghostly platoon followed them, their presence haunting the men all the way back to base. When they returned, they were broken, their minds scarred by what they had witnessed. The jungle had claimed many lives, but this time, it had claimed their sanity. The lesson: war leaves its mark not only on the living but also on the souls of the fallen, forever trapped in the horrors they endured. The beaches of Normandy are remembered as the site of one of the most intense and deadly battles of World War II. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives in the assault, and the ground remains soaked with the memories of that fateful day. Decades later, the region became a popular tourist destination, with many visiting to pay their respects. However, not all who visit the hallowed grounds come back the same. A group of military historians decided to spend the night near the remains of an old German bunker. They were researching the battle and wanted to experience the area as it was during the war. The locals warned them of strange occurrences in the area, but they dismissed the stories as mere superstition. As the sun set, the historians set up camp near the bunker. The air was still, and the only sound was the distant crashing of waves. But as night fell, the tranquility was shattered by the sound of gunfire and the distant cries of men in battle. At first, the historians thought it was a reenactment, but no such event had been scheduled. One of the historians, a former soldier himself, felt a chill run down his spine. He knew the sound of real combat when he heard it, and this was no staged event. As they moved closer to the bunker, they saw it: soldiers, both American and German, locked in a fierce battle, their ghostly forms reliving the final moments of their lives. The historians watched in horror as the soldiers fought and died over and over again, their screams echoing through the night. The ghosts didn't seem to notice the living men, too caught up in their endless struggle. But then, something changed. One of the ghostly figures, a young American soldier, locked eyes with the lead historian. The ghost's face was twisted in pain, his uniform torn and bloody. He raised his hand as if begging for help, but there was nothing the living could do. The apparition moved closer, his eyes filled with sorrow, and whispered, "Why did we have to die?" The historians stood frozen in terror, unable to speak or move. The ghost faded into the darkness, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of despair. For the rest of the night, the sounds of battle continued, echoing through the darkness. The historians left the next morning, shaken to their core. They had come to study history, but they had experienced the horror of war in a way they could never have imagined. The lesson: some battles never end, and the souls lost to war may forever be trapped in the moment of their death. War is a tragedy that lingers long after the guns fall silent. The physical scars may fade, but the emotional and spiritual wounds remain, haunting not only those who lived through it but also those who dare to revisit its battlegrounds. The spirits of the fallen may never find peace, and their suffering serves as a chilling reminder of the horrors of war. These stories remind us that while we may move on from war, the echoes of the past are never far behind.